So thank you. You can sit and so we must excuse Aminata Traoré because she went back to Mali yesterday night, and to share this this session, it will be a co-chairing between Alice Walker and Michael Mansfield. So Alice, you have the floor.
We both have the floor. I'm just going to say we have 3 witnesses in this next section, one of whom, Shawan Jabarin, cannot be here because, won't surprise you, well perhaps it will in some cases, there is a travel ban yet again and cannot be here. There will be another witness in fact representing, or at least putting forward the same points from Al-Haq. Gracia Carreccia will be the second witness, and there's a third. And Alice is just going to describe what they're going to be dealing with, and then I'll call the first one.
Thank you, Michael. Luciana Coconi and Leah Semel will give testimonies over the denial of the right to freedom of movement, of residence, to leave and return to one's country, to a nationality, to work, to form recognized trade unions, to education, to freedom of opinion and expression, and to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. This will be about 10 minutes long, and there will be questions afterward.
Luciana, please. There you are.
Yeah, thank you. It's okay, thank you. Good morning to everyone. Thank you. The aim of my presentation is to give an overview of the information given by some instrument of United Nations on human rights violations of the Palestinian people. I will only mention violation of human rights in the context of the text of paragraph C, Article 2 of the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid that you can see on the agenda of this session. I will make a short resume of the document I submitted to the Tribunal. I must start saying that, on the one hand, Israel has ratified the vast majority of international treaties related to the protection and promotion of human rights. Each of these treaties has a monitoring body called Committee, which monitors the implementation of the treaty and to which states must submit periodic reports detailing how these rights are incorporated into legislation and made effective. Meanwhile, the committee answers these reports with its concluding observations, expressing its recommendations and concerns to the state. In the specific case of Israel, the committees, in their concluding observations, have condemned the constant violations of human rights to which the Palestinian population is submitted. On the other hand, various special procedures have expressed concern at the human rights situation in Israel and in the OPT. Special procedures is the general name given to the extra-conventional mechanisms for the protection of human rights established by the Commission on Human Rights, replaced in 2006 by the Human Rights Council. Their task is to examine, monitor, advise, and publicly report on human rights situation in specific countries or territories, known as country mandates, or on major phenomena of human rights violations worldwide, known as thematic mandates. It must be highlighted that, although Israel upholds that human rights treaties are applied only in its territory, both in reports of the human rights committees and in reports by the special rapporteurs, it clearly states that human rights treaties are applied in all the territories and areas under the effective control of Israel. Therefore, they are applied in Israel and in the OPT, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. I will start with the information given by the treaty committees, and I will finish with 2 reports of 2 different special rapporteurs. And I will give some information and some examples about what happens in Israel and in the OPT. I will start with the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The committee is concerned about the denial of the rights of many Palestinians to return and repossess their land in Israel. This committee is also concerned that separate sectors are maintained for Jewish and Arab persons in Israel, in particular in the areas of housing and education, and that such separation result in unequal treatment and funding. The committee notes with concern the application in the OPT of different laws, policies and practices applied to Palestinians on the one hand and to Israelis on the other hand. It is concerned in particular by information about unequal distribution of water resources to the detriment of Palestinians, about the disproportionate targeting of Palestinians in house demolitions, and about the application of different criminal laws leading to prolonged detention and harsher punishments for Palestinians than for Israelis for the same offenses. The Committee on Human Rights states that water shortages disproportionately affect the Palestinian population of the West Bank due to prevention of construction and maintenance of water and sanitation infrastructure, as well as the prohibition on construction of wells. This committee also is concerned at frequent disproportionate restriction on access to places of worship for non-Jews. It further notes with concern that the regulations containing a list of holy sites only include Jewish holy places. The next committee is the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. This committee states that the excessive emphasis upon the state as a Jewish state encourages discrimination and accords a second-class status to its non-Jewish citizens. This discriminatory attitude is apparent in the continuing lower standard of living of Israeli Arabs as a result, inter alia, of higher unemployment rates, restricted access to and participation in trade unions, lack of access to housing, water, electricity, and health care, and a lower level of education. This committee is also concerned about the persisting inequality in wages of Jews and Arabs in Israel, as well as the severe underrepresentation of the Arab sector in the civil service and universities. The Committee on the Rights of the Child is deeply concerned about the serious deterioration of health services and access to education of children in the OPT, especially as a result of the measures imposed by the Israeli Defense Forces, including road closures, curfews, and mobility restrictions, and the destruction of Palestinian economic and health infrastructure. In particular, the committee is concerned about the consequent delays of an interference with medical personnel, the shortages of basic medical supplies, and malnutrition in children, owing to the disruption of markets and the prohibitively high prices of basic stuff. Finally, this Committee on the Rights of the Child is concerned that investment in and the quality of education in the Israeli Arab sector in Israel is significantly lower than the Jewish sector. I will finish with the two last committees, the Committee Against Torture that shows its serious concern at the many allegations on degrading treatment at checkpoints and due delays and denial of entry, including for persons with urgent health needs. Finally, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women states that the restriction of movement in the occupied territories, as well as regular harassment by settlers of both children and teachers on their way to and from school, have had a negative impact on Palestinian women and girls' access to education and to their health. To finish my presentation, I will talk about two reports of two special rapporteurs. The first one is the report of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, Asma Shahanshir, that went on a mission to Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory during January 2008. She states that the Israeli authorities control and restrict Palestinian movement through a system of permits, checkpoints, curfews, visas, and the barrier. Due to this elaborate system, millions of Muslims and Christians have reportedly been impeded since 1993 from worshipping at some of the sites they consider to be their most holy places in the world, especially in Jerusalem. On several occasions, age restrictions have been imposed by the government of Israel on the access to Al-Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount in Jerusalem. During Ramadan in 2007, for example, some Sometimes only Palestinians over the age of 45 were allowed entrance, and at other times only Jerusalem identity card holders or only residents of the old city over the age of 50 were permitted. On some Fridays, children were allowed to cross Israeli checkpoints with older relatives, but on the last Friday of Ramadan 2007, even young children were reportedly turned back. On the 21st of September 2007, no access was permitted for Palestinians from the West Bank since all checkpoints were closed for the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur. Finally, several legal provisions in Israel aim to safeguard and preserve sacred places from desecration and stipulates criminal sanctions for the violation of a holy site. However, all the 136 places which have been designated as holy sites until the end of 2007 were Jewish. Finally, I will consider two paragraphs of the last report of the Special Rapporteur on the Situation of Human Rights in Israel and in the OPT since 1967, Mr. Richard Falk. He stated that the dual discriminatory structure of settler administration, security, mobility, and law as compared to the Palestinian subjugation seemed to qualify the long Israeli occupation of the West Bank as an instance of apartheid. The wider infrastructure of occupation, and in particular the dual system of roads, represents a growing violation by Israel, the occupying power, of the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid. The dual system of roads, as correlated with legal regimes, create two domains in the West Bank, one for privileged Israeli settlers and the other for subjugated Palestinians living under an occupation.
Thank you, Luciana. That's an amazing condensation of the material that we'll just reminding you. All witnesses have made statements. In this particular case, there's a 14-page report that has been condensed into those few minutes. So I won't repeat that throughout the day, but all witnesses have given, which will be available, obviously, for all of you to see. Luciana, just a couple of questions, and then maybe some others. First of all, and you mention it in one of the paragraphs of your report, the question is this: can you explain why Israel insists that the international human rights treaties only apply to Israel, whereas in the occupied Palestinian territories, it's humanitarian law that applies? Can you explain the difference and why they're saying this?
Well, yes, Israel always affirmed that international human rights legislation or treaties are applied only in Israel. And they say that is because these international human rights treaties only regulate the relation between the state and its citizens in peacetime. So they only have to be applied in Israel. And in the occupied Palestinian territory, as a result of the belligerent occupation, it must be applied the humanitarian law that regulates the armed conflicts and the occupation, in local or international. But all the reports of the treaties I mentioned, and I can say surely that all the reports of human rights committees of United Nations insist in the fact that all the human rights treaties must be applied not only in Israel but in the occupied Palestinian territory, because Israel has the effective control over those territories. And the International Court of Justice, in its advisory opinion about the legal consequences of the construction of a wall in the OPT, specifically determined that treaties are applicable not to the act of a state in the exercise of its authority, although this may take place outside its own territory. So for the international law, it's very clear that international human rights treaties must be applied not only in Israel but in the Palestine territories.
Luciano, I have a question. Do any of the reports you cite go beyond describing the international wrong of apartheid to consider the crime of apartheid?
Sorry, I didn't hear very well.
Do any of the reports that you cite go beyond describing the international wrong? You know, we talk about apartheid as being wrong. but what about it being a crime?
No, these human rights reports of the committees doesn't talk about specifically about apartheid. Only a few special rapporteurs do that, especially Richard Falk and John Dugard, and the former special rapporteur on the right to food, Jan Ziegler, that specifically talked about the world of the apartheid when he went on a visit to the territories in 2003. But the treaties, the report of the treaty doesn't talk specifically about apartheid. But if you analyze in a whole all this violation, I think it's clear that altogether represent act of apartheid.
There's time for one more question. Stefan, oh, sorry, Marion.
May I just ask you whether you can make good use sometimes of the reports of B'Tselem?
If I use them, yes, I wrote a report about this, and I used the information about the applicability of law and the content of the law in Israel and in the OPT, the military orders. But I didn't talk about that because I think that other experts or witnesses will talk specifically about law. But yes, they give very good information.
Thank you.
You're welcome.